Pearl and Maxine, the two main characters of the X trilogy, created by Ty West and brought to life by Mia Goth, have quite a lot of blood on their hands. Literally.
We've all got blood on our hands now.
Throughout all three movies, we witness both characters indulge a certain darkness within that finds a perverse outlet through murder.
Face down, ass up.
Murder of the people around them that stand in the way of their identity-defying dreams of becoming the brightest, most beloved stars on the big screen, including their own parents.
Divine intervention.
Yet it goes without saying that, particularly in X, the one movie where both these characters' paths intersect, we're generally meant to identify Pearl as the villain and Maxine as the final girl heroine of the story. And while this is of course pretty undeniable within the context of X by itself,
You're a kidnapping, murdering fiend. I'm a star.
in the broader context of the entire trilogy, we may find that the differences and similarities of these two look-alike ladies from two unalike eras can get a bit shrouded in the gray stuff.
You do got the devil in you.
So let's talk about Pearl and Maxine, the nature and/or nurture that shaped who they are, the meanings behind the different yet eerily similar tones both their movies end on, and when put together, what it all has to say about the fame by way of screen-obsessed world we've been living in since the turn of the 20th century. But first...
Strip.
I'm special.
You're special.
I'm special.
You're special.
Pearl takes place in 1979 and follows Pearl, a young and lonely farm girl who likes to do inappropriate animal impressions in barns. Wait, wrong era. It's actually 1918 on that very same fated to be desecrated farmland where Pearl, a possible devil spawn, may need to have her head checked on account of she talks to animals in barns.
Stop staring at me.
Also, she kills them too. After being brainwashed by the Hollywood elites into believing she can be a creepy-ass vintage black and white dancer too,
I do love a good audience.
Pearl executes her dream by executing everyone standing in her way of achieving it, including her own mother, who demanded her daughter spend her life tending to their family and milking cows instead of tending to her dance moves and milking scarecrows. Next on Pearl's Do Me or Die list is the town film projectionist, who senses Pearl may be hiding some skeletons in her closet, but that's probably just the smell of her dead mother in the basement. So Pearl puts him out because he didn't want to put out with her paralyzed father starving to death downstairs.
It just seems kind of gay, doesn't it?
Which leads to Pearl feeding her dead meat dad a pillowcase for his last supper, before hitting up the local dance troupe audition with her sister-in-law Mitzi, and bombing harder than her cold husband getting bombed at war.
We're looking for something different today. Someone with X Factor.
Do you think you got the X Factor?
I don't know, because I'm not quite sure what the X Factor is.
So Pearl cries about it like a child who got her favorite popsicle taken away for 37 minutes straight, while also spilling the beans about all the blood she spilled to Mitzi. But that's okay, because Pearl's able to make peace with Mitzi in no time, which all leads to the shocking twist reveal that the King of Texas did in fact survive the war, and he's horrified to find credits floating in front of his wife's face. X takes place in 1979 and follows a group of hippies, the smelly kind. But not the traditionally bad-smelling kind of hippies, the kind that smell from all the sex they have with each other. And if there's anywhere hippies like to film themselves having sex with each other, it's on a farm. And if there are any farm owners who hate hippies filming themselves having sex with each other on their farm without so much as an invite, it's everyone's favorite deviant couple, Pearl and Howard, who have now entered their, oh my god, what happened to your face, era due to a fatal skin cell condition known as aging, which triggers the dirtiest hippie of the bunch, Maxine, to face the harsh reality that her dream of career jumping from dirty movie star to Hollywood movie star, what's the difference, am I right, might one day be crushed by a bad case of wrinkle face. But love is in the air, much like the smell of dirty hippie, and it makes Pearl super horny. It also makes the young and innocent Lorraine demand a promotion from behind the camera sound recorder to in front of the camera sound maker.
Well, I'm young.
Which her writer-director boyfriend RJ thinks just really crosses the line. So RJ leaves his passion project behind before running into Pearl, who's still all peeved about her unglazed donut, which is a metaphor for her husband's bad heart, of course. So she sticks RJ all raw and messy like before her and Howard have themselves a good old-fashioned hoedown, which is an official military term for eliminate all hippies on site.
Roger, 1 for 1.
Dirty hippies.
Which makes Maxine, the final hippie, mad and with no choice but to make like Jake Paul and f some old people up. before riding off into the sunset boulevard in Hollywood, which all leads to the shocking twist reveal that Maxine always had freckles on her face. Maxine takes place in 1985 and follows Maxine, who has now entered her Hollywood phony era, which is to say, if she didn't have a phone, she wouldn't have received the news from her manager that she's been cast in a big Hollywood horror movie, and it's all because she won over the Hollywood elites with her huge talents. But Hollywood life isn't all fun and castrations. It also makes Maxine experience fraudulent syndrome on account of she receives a videotape exposing her illegal fraudulent crimes. And whoever sent Maxine the incriminating evidence definitely has a serious bone to pick with her, because he keeps killing all of her fake Hollywood friends, which Maxine finds mostly convenient until the mysterious killer kills her gay best friend trope, and then sends his bacon boy to explain that if she doesn't accept an invitation for a meet and greet with the secret killer at his secret Hollywood lair, just 3 secret layers down from Bill Cosby's secret lair, you can't miss it, then he'll reveal to the media her darkest secret, that she's not actually a blonde. Or respectful to her elders. Which causes Maxine to take matters into her own hands by turning her hands into lethal weapons. And then doing to the greasy bacon guy what everyone in Hollywood wants to do to people who recite the Bible. But Maxine goes to the secret lair anyway.
What are you? An idiot sandwich.
To discover the mystery killer is really her father, the guy who put all those freckles on her face. And since he doesn't know how to tell his daughter he's gay, he tries to give her an exorcism or something instead. But Maxine turns the tables by turning her father's head into a Chef Boyardee microwave mishap. Which leads to Maxine finally achieving her dreams of becoming Hollywood's latest plastic construct. Which all leads to the shocking mid-credits twist that Maxine is a supervillain and has now taken over Hollywood forever. Pearl's world is that of a wholesome, light and quirky early 1900s movie, a time when film, along with its dream-inspired Technicolor magic, was most often used as an escape from the difficult realities of the era. Realities such as, but not limited to, being relegated to the predetermined path of a dutiful wife like Pearl, or being exposed firsthand to the horrors of the First World War like Howard. The idea here being that there was a dark underbelly of confinement and madness in America that sure wasn't finding an outlet through the big screen pictures of the time. This repressed darkness refracted into an almost cancerous horror at the center of this movie. Something reflective of both Pearl and the era she's of. Something rotting deep inside what at first glance appears to be a bright and whimsical wonderland. It slowly protrudes the seams throughout, until it erupts in untamable madness. But the juicy question at the forefront of this character study of a movie is whether the explosive return of Pearl's repressed is more owed to nature or nurture. Or to put it more specifically, does Pearl's psychotic break occur because of her mother's stringent authority over her life, or in spite of it? In my first video on Pearl, I tackled Pearl's character arc entirely from the perspective of nurture. And while I stand by that video as it reflects my viewpoint after my first watch of the movie, my take has evolved some thanks to the added perspective of time and many rewatches since. Some may even say too many rewatches, to which I would say, just because you're my therapist doesn't mean you need to leave comments in my special YouTube space, Janice. But that's not to say the nurture perspective is the incorrect one, just that so much of the movie's intrigue comes from the fact that it provides just the right amount of evidence for us to make a compelling case for either nurture or nature as the root cause for Pearl's violence. Let's investigate. The case for nurture would say that Pearl's appetite for murder is not inherent to her, that she begins murdering small animals and eventually human beings as a symptom of feeling trapped in a life she can't escape, as a direct response to her environment.
How could I be responsible for another life? Life terrifies me.
A dark and twisted rebellion of sorts. Not a trait she was born with, but a nasty little habit she developed. And it all comes down to her mother Ruth's strict parameters, building a cage around Pearl as to not allow any corrupting outside influence in. Whether that be influenza or the equally infectious idea that life outside the cage could not only be attainable, but worth abandoning her familial duties for.
God forbid sickness returns to our home.
Yet in her uncompromising, lawful-like attempt to prevent any darkness from getting into their home, she inadvertently creates and helps a darkness within her daughter fester and grow, until it eventually destroys them all. And it wouldn't be solely due to Pearl's mother's very reasonable attempt to protect her family during hard times.
Einziger Grund, warum wir nicht krank.
but rather the overwhelming absence of love, affection, and validation of who her daughter is and what she desires. In other words, the absence of a more nurturing environment. Which in turn would be the very reason those outside taboos become so enticing to Pearl. Because if she can't find love and fulfillment with her life on the farm alongside her cold-as-ice mother and vegetable father, she begins to believe she can find that love and fulfillment by being reborn as a star on the big screen. By becoming the very escapist fantasy she adores. By receiving boundless love from a boundless audience.
All I really want is to be loved.
Pearl's tragic swerve for the murderess is bound tight to her maddening need to prove to the dance troupe judges that she's worthy of this dream. But these judges are really only surrogates for her mother's judgment. We can see that Ruth's domineering eye looking down upon Pearl is the true villain of the story. And we know this because she looks like Two-Face. No, because Ruth's adamant stance against her daughter is the very essence that fuels the darkness that eventually mutates Pearl into an all-out monster. As Pearl begins her descent into murdering people, her turn is framed more like a child throwing a reactionary tantrum. When Ruth's own darkness, her own suppressed rage for a burdensome life of sacrifice and servitude begins bursting out of her in that infamous dinner scene.
You dare talk to me about regret? I was supposed to be his wife, not his mother!
It directly causes Pearl to lash out in a blind frenzy, resulting in an accidental deep frying. And her choice to embrace letting her mother sizzle on low rather than come to her senses and find her medical attention comes from a deeply wounded desire to inflict the same pain her mother inflicted onto her. The same unloving judgment.
When you fail, and you will fail.
I want you to remember what it feels like.
Because that's how I feel every time I look at you.
I want you to remember what it feels like, because that's how I felt every time you looked at me.
Likewise, it isn't until the projectionist starts looking at Pearl with judgment as well that her kicking, screaming, and murdering starts swirling up again.
I'm not staying on this farm!
And Mercy killing her father comes immediately after a very judgmental look over how naughty Pearl has been.
I wish she wouldn't look at me like that. What do you think?
It should go without saying that this perspective isn't an excuse for Pearl's monstrous murders.
Well, duh.
But rather a way of understanding how an environment can be essential in igniting and stoking the flames of something dark and disturbed within a person. Be it in the larger context of a society or in a smaller familial setting such as this, when a prevailing authority constricts an individual's desire and ambition for something more, something unconventional to the norms of the era, a deranged rebellion can result. And this is a thematic idea of the reoccurring variety throughout this whole generation jumping trilogy. So stay tuned, fair viewer, because first we must give credence to the nature explanation for Pearl's wicked deeds, which posits Pearl's darkness as something she was born with, a volcano within that was always going to erupt. Ruth surely is concerned with not letting any outside sickness in, but even more, she's terrified of her daughter's innate sickness seeping out and infecting the outside world.
I've seen the things you've done in private. You believe no one is watching.
Killing animals isn't some habit Pearl developed, but a big red blaring flag for psychopathy. We have much more sympathy for Ruth from this vantage point because not only was she dealt a bad hand in life with her husband's illness and resulting paralysis, she also has the added burden of raising a budding psychopath incapable of experiencing empathy for her own family's plight, only able to feel the tragedy of not getting her self-centered desires met.
If only they would just die.
If you're resting cozy in the nurture camp and not seeing the sus aura around Pearl, you may look at this scene.
Why do you hate me, Mama?
As Pearl standing up for herself, finally calling out her mother's hatred and active plotting against her own daughter, as Ruth returns a guilty look. Yet on the nurture side,
I only want what's best.
When do I get what I want?
this moment reads as far more unsettling, with Ruth appearing frightened by her own daughter, scared that she may go full American Psycho on her and her helpless hubby right then and there. Rightfully so, because she kind of eventually does. And then there's the projectionist and all the naughtiness Pearl gets up to with him, and his scarecrow stunt double. On the nurture end of the spectrum, we'd say this era's conservative concealment of all things sexual is a strong influence on Pearl's madness. That being forced to suppress rather than express and connect with her natural desires made her thirst for that outlet to a point of derangement. Yet, on the nature side, Ruth was right to shield Pearl from such outer temptations, given that they're precisely what speak to and entice that inborn darkness within her. Sneaking off to watch Palace Follies and flirting with the projectionist while in town are against her mother's strict rule because they're the very things that delude her into believing they're worth killing her parents and cheating on her husband for. In this sense, the fantasy itself is the corrupting factor, not the boundary setting around one's desire to lose themselves completely in that fantasy. A little tidbit from Mia Goth on the movie's Blu-ray features brought to my attention that the projectionist can actually be interpreted as a figment cooked up by Pearl's kooky mind.
I feel as though the projectionist is almost a figment of Pearl's imagination. He's Pearl's projections of what she desires and wants.
From this angle, the story isn't about a woman being forced down the dark spiral of madness. It's about realizing just how nuts she was all along.
I used to think you were crazy. I know. But now I can see you're nuts. I thank you.
The projectionist showing her naughty barnyard-like acts on the screen and encouraging her to embrace her own individualistic wants at all costs now comes off as a hallucinated devil on Pearl's shoulder.
You can do anything if you want it bad enough.
I want it.
And don't let anything stand in your way.
And when he later takes a turn for the fearful over seeing her as she truly is, it's almost as if her darkness is showing her how to initiate those killer instincts within. A mental simulation guiding her to embrace the monster she was born to be. So what are we to do with these two nature-nurture perspectives when so much of this murderous origin story comes down to the question of the chicken or the egg? Or rather, the Pearl or the Pearl's mother? Or rather, the poor Mr. Goose or the poor Mr. Goose's killer? Because the pro-Pearl's mother's choice camp often cites the fact that Ruth says she's seen the malevolence in Pearl as her explicitly saying she's seen Pearl murdering small animals in private.
I've seen the things you've done in private. Malevolence is festering in you, I see it.
Which it very well could, but this reference to malevolence could just as well be a woman who was raised in an oppressively conservative and prudish environment, interpreting her daughter's private sexual appetites as the malevolent work of the devil.
Then what a fine woman you hope to become, leaving your mother alone to rot so you could dance with a bunch of city whores.
The point being that the lack of specificity leaves room for interpretation. By the time you reach the climactic monologue where Pearl is getting a bit too honest for comfort with her sister-in-law, you may see the humanity and the tragedy in this monster of her mother's making. See a bit of her dwindling soul in your own. And through that, perhaps open your mind to the idea that the most feared monsters can sometimes be created. That they could have once had a fighting chance at being a healthy-minded person before environmental circumstances hatched their worst qualities and left them with nothing but that instilled darkness to embrace. The only form of empowerment or agency they have left to turn to.
It's not about what I want anymore, Mitzi. It's about making the best of what I have.
Or you might see this monologue as the selfish whimpering of an insane narcissist, a disturbing portrait of a person who was born without empathy, who simply cannot compute other people's feelings, who was attracted to the superficial light of the big screen like a moth and is now, in all her self-absorbed lunacy, mourning the idea that she won't be worshipped and praised like a goddess by the masses, while the bodies of her parents, whose deaths she's fully responsible for, rot in the basement below her, all before posing her next innocent victim's murder as the best thing she's got going in her life now.
It's not about what I want anymore, Mitzi. It's about making the best of what I have.
Whatever subjective conclusion you come to about Pearl's darkness, the movie itself comes to a close on her full-blown smiling insanity. That darkness swallowing her whole, taking her completely. For over 60 years she'll incubate within it, and in time, reemerge as one crazy old perverted golem witch lady. The World of X is reflective of the cinematic renaissance of the 1970s, a time when the Christian-influenced censorship regime of America turned more lax than ever as a side effect of 1960s counterculture movements, ushering in a whole new American mentality that liberated filmmaking from the rigid constraints around showcasing violence and sexuality on screen. Though it's essential to note that X takes place right at the tail end of the 1970s, just before the American censorship empire would strike back in the 1980s. But more on that when we get to Maxine. Because as X's core group of free-loving characters wander into this far-off and forgotten farmland of conservative America, where the vengeful ghosts of Pearl and Howard are rudely awakened, a violent reckoning ensues, coalescing in a climactic clash between the rivaling representations of sexual conservatism and sexual liberalism. But as we know, Pearl once represented the latter as well. She too wanted what Maxine wanted, to embrace her lustful side and taste the fruits of fame by shaking what her mother disapproved of for the camera, or in Maxine's case, what her father disapproved of. These two women are essentially the same person, hence why, and let's face it, you wouldn't have ever noticed this without my super amazing YouTuber insight powers, both characters are played by the same actress. Maxine's most notable difference, however, is that unlike Pearl, she escaped the conservative religious life she felt imprisoned by. We're never shown the intimate details of how and why Maxine ran away from her Looney Tune preacher of a father, but she did have the advantage of growing up during the shifting tides of America's sexual revolution, which is to say, the cultural soil of the two very different generations Maxine and Pearl sprouted out of is a significant, if not essential reason for where these two characters end up in life. Running away to become a topless dancer may not have been the most socially accepted path for a woman of the late 1970s, but it certainly wasn't as vehemently looked down upon as in the 1910s. Pearl had never heard the word bohemian before.
I don't know what that is.
Means I can pack up and leave whenever I want to.
Whereas Maxine is introduced as the very definition of it, even having managed to find her own little community of like-minded status quo rebels. But it wouldn't be an American social movement without some good old capitalistic exploitation. It's questionable how invested in the ideal of the free love movement producer Wayne actually is, given that most his dialogue stems back to the profitability of the adult home entertainment market he has an entrepreneurial foresight on.
Stopping pictures turn regular folks into stars. We're gonna do it all ourselves.
The camera can now be used by the common man to capitalize on such naughty perversions. But not only that, it can also be used to glamorize and even indoctrinate. After all, without this medium, a nice Christian girl like Lorraine wouldn't be so easily persuaded to join in on such dazzling displays of ecstasy and power.
Smart.
When did you become such a prude?
I want to be in it.
Well, you can't.
When did you become such a prude?
Just as we saw with Pearl, observing the nude through the tube can have a profound behavioral effect. But similarly to Pearl, a question lingers. Is this to Lorraine's benefit? A liberation from societal constraints around natural human desire?
Attraction is out of our control. It ain't healthy keeping those feelings locked away inside.
Or is she pressured into proving she can do what all the cool kids are doing nowadays? That she can embrace momentarily gratifying pleasure too, despite the negative consequences it yields on her relationship. Well, we can't ask Lorraine if it was worth it in the long term on account of her face gets blown off very soon after. But the point isn't to give us direct answers, so much as it's to put on display the various causes and effects of the free love mentality through a lens only horror can provide. And if there's any effect free love is guaranteed to have, it's to piss off some old, conservative, possibly orc-related, very sexually frustrated geezers. While X utilizes the most fundamental slasher setup of the trilogy, drawing from such trope-defining classics as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, and Friday the 13th, the movie sheds more light on its murderous villain's humanity than any of those past influences. And much of this comes from the fact that, setting aside their disgusting murder perversions, Pearl and Howard are two discarded outcasts in a changing world with nothing but each other to hold on to in their fading existence.
You're the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Not anymore. Always.
A common criticism I've come across is that we aren't provided enough reason for why Howard chose to stay with Pearl after he returned to a redecorated home in 1918. But though Pearl is obviously the more central character of the two in this trilogy, there's still enough sprinkled detail to imply that Howard was facing a maddening darkness of his own out in the trenches of war.
I find it most frightening at night. Many soldiers have gone mad with the fear.
An experience that, like Pearl, also began with a rebellion against his parentage.
The lengths my brother will go to just to spite his father.
We can put together then that whether it was immediately or eventually after this final scene in Pearl, Howard found that he and his wife really matched each other's freak now, and embraced their mutual need for a murderous outlet. Would more scenes or even an entire movie portraying the finer details of how Howard came to this chilling conclusion be interesting? That would be a hell yes from me. Is it absolutely necessary? I don't think so, given that there's enough implication to read between the lines. But either way, X gets the point of their dynamic across and makes us feel an unexpected sense of pity for this dying old couple of dicks. Perhaps because we know there's a wrinkled end awaiting us all who live long enough to see it, and arriving there only to look back in debilitating regret would just really suck the big one, to put it in scholarly terms. Speaking of which, this is a theme expressed through the voice of many of the main players of this trilogy. No, not sucking the big one, you perv, but the notion of taking advantage of youth and beauty before the speeding bullet train of time takes it away.
But I have to know that I tried, or I'm gonna regret it for the rest of my life.
I've been thinking about it all day, and well, I'm young.
I'm gonna be 33 years old pretty soon, and in hardcore, women age like bread, not wine.
Because one day, we're gonna be too old to and life's too short if you ask me.
Roger that.
Pearl is the manifestation of this driving dilemma for Maxine, an existential shadow she desperately tries to suppress by taking loads of booger sugar, as well as loads of other kinds of loads for the camera.
I thank you.
All to keep herself laser focused on achieving those Hollywood dream girl dreams. Yet, the more Maxine shuts out that shadow, the more she tries to escape her fear of becoming like Pearl in her old age, regretful and resentful from a disappointing life, the more power Pearl becomes imbued with. Without knowing it, Maxine spits on Pearl's past, makes a mockery of her life by masquerading as the young farm girl she once was, and desecrates her territory by embracing a naughtiness with an audience that Pearl was only ever able to embrace in shame and secret. The movie's score accentuates this almost spiritually brewing force of rage inside Pearl, with moaning vocals that drift between sensual ecstasy and painful regret. The hard lines of sexual conservatism have been crossed without care or awareness of the pent-up people of the past who covet those lines, causing an explosion of violence, and a horrifying confrontation of the disenchanting side of promiscuity. But this whole staring down the barrel of the inevitable loss of youth experience empowers our last standing soldier of the sexual revolution, Maxine, to confront her shadow head on. And it's here that, like any great fictional rivalry, it all comes down to a battle of beliefs. Maxine's new age belief that becoming a sex symbol on the screen will save her.
I will not accept a life I do not deserve.
And Pearl's old age belief that she was right to suppress those same sinful temptations and embrace a traditional life.
Don't just laugh at me.
A standoff between two warring American ideologies. And befitting of the decade they're in, Maxine wins the movie. Perhaps because of an unwavering conviction in her dogma that comes from a place of purity, of living as one is without harm to others.
The Lord smiles on those who accept him.
Whereas old woman Pearl's belief is based in hypocrisy, condemning deviancy while doing the most deviant thing one person can do to another in secret. Old lady tickles. No, murder. Oh, and torture too. Thus, only one embodiment of belief is permitted to leave this farm and thrive in a new decade of America, while Pearl is, quite poetically, left behind to die on it. Yet Maxine doesn't just leave Pearl to die all naturally like, she barrels right past that high road exit and crushes her wrinkly little head instead. This is Maxine's first murder, highlighting that perhaps the haunting conservative shadow of Pearl has awoken a new edge in Maxine, caused her to indulge a little darkness of her own.
It'll be our secret.
In the same way that Pearl's own conservative shadow in the form of her mother inspired her to do so long ago.
Amen.
Praise the f***ing Lord.
Maxine's World is an encapsulation of Hollywood 1985, a time when America, much like our titular character, saw substantial peaks in growth from an aggressive capitalistic mindset.
Don't let anyone tell you that America's best days are behind her.
And the excesses of the American dream felt more alluring and attainable than ever before, thanks in part to the rapid expansion of cable television and VHS, allowing the consumerist fantasy to be sold to even more consumers in even more locations. Though desire wasn't all screens were selling at this time, fear was every bit as lucrative a market. The shadow of Christian conservative America cast an eye of guilt and moral panic over Hollywood, causing an identity crisis, an internal struggle over adhering to the religion of old that preaches detesting a life of sin, or the religion of new that preaches embracing that so-called sin and getting yours on your terms. But underneath it all, time, relevance, and a do-whatever-it-takes mentality fuel both ideologies, providing the promise of a heaven that is but a hollow construct in the end. Still, Maxine is the hero of this here story, and we stick by her side as she navigates her way through a 1980s Tinseltown that is notably light on the tinsel. The movie portrays a darker, dirtier Los Angeles, a dimly neon-lit, almost hellish-looking landscape where the hopeful believers at the bottom do whatever's necessary for a chance to be admitted past those heavenly gates of Hollywood. And that's how the industry of Hollywood is visually portrayed here, like heaven. Plastered in bright whites and more expansive than any other setting explored in this trilogy. Yet still, there's a striking emptiness in all of its enormity.
Fascinating how something can look so believable when in reality it's all a facade.
It's worth highlighting that the interior of Pearl's farmhouse sports a hell-like aesthetic too, drawing yet another parallel between her and Maxine, both characters attempting to claw their way out from the hell of dissatisfaction and into the perceived high life of stardom. With Pearl, the dark dungeon lighting of her home can either be read as reflective of her innate darkness, or the dark imprisonment that's creating her madness. But either way, her movie ends on being rejected by the gatekeepers of her supposed freedom.
It's gonna be a no.
And finally surrendering to her hellish surrounding. With Maxine though, her movie begins with winning over those gatekeepers, and then spending the rest of the runtime fighting like hell, pun intended, to hold on to her golden ticket as the shadow of her past attempts to rip it away from her. Survivor's guilt is our main character's main dilemma here, surviving the events of X and taking on a false identity, one more aligned with age-old industry standards.
More all-American, younger and blonde.
As to avoid facing legal consequences for the crimes she witnessed and even dabbled in herself. But from a more allegorical to the human experience angle, Maxine is essentially battling fraudulent syndrome. Rather than feeling fulfillment from being awarded the role of a lifetime, she's met with fear that it could all be taken away from her. That if the public and her employers discover who she really is, and all the sinful things she's done, she'll be cast right back into her hell as fast as she escaped it.
Whatever horror happened here 300 years ago, it's not over.
Likewise, the intrusive thought of mortality Pearl represented for Maxine in X returns to haunt her again, her final words echoing louder than ever now.
You're not innocent! You're not special! It'll all be taken from you!
The scene with Maxine covered in all that special effects goop captures Pearl's conservative eye weighing down on her, molding Maxine into her image as the clock ticks further and further away from youth and opportunity, suffocating her. And this suffocating anxiety is every bit as attributed to her flamboyant preacher father, Ernest. We see in the climactic Scooby-Doo reveal just how powerless he renders Maxine, that visual motif of suffocation shown through his grasp as well. Because Old Woman Pearl is just an extension of what Maxine's father represents, a puritanical life she's been trying to outrun for years. Just as young Pearl once did, Maxine rebelled against the strict doctrine enforced by her parent and found solace in a new doctrine sold to her by the Hollywood machine. One that promises she can ascend and find her place amongst the stars as long as she holds an unwavering faith and belief that she is exceptional.
You're special. There ain't nobody else out there like you.
I'm special. Mama's gonna feel real stupid when she finds out, won't she?
Most interesting is the fact that this unshakable confidence was instilled into Maxine by her father.
Preach it like you mean it or it won't come true.
I will not accept a life I do not deserve!
I do not deserve!
It may be debatable whether Pearl is the result of nature or nurture, but for Maxine, nurture appears to be the unambiguous explanation for how she turned out, because the movie only emphasizes this one aspect of her upbringing, that her father bestowed the belief that she can be a star onto her.
You're gonna be the star of the church one day.
I want to be just like you, Daddy.
Ernest created his daughter's ambition. Maxine simply redirected the target of that ambition.
I'm a star. Ain't nobody else like me. The whole world's gonna know my name.
And what of Maxine's new murderous edge that Old Woman Pearl provoked out of her? Well, it appears to have only gotten nuttier. Much like her father, Maxine's willing to get her hands dirty to achieve her goals, even if that means maiming and killing. From the meta angle this trilogy comes equipped with, everything the past events of X represent for Maxine, the sex and the violence captured on camera in the 1970s, represent precisely the kind of filmmaking Christian America is returning to suppress and deem sinful in the mid-1980s.
The fact of the matter is, Hollywood sells sin.
Satanists have been propagating sex and violence around our homes for years now.
And as Pearl knows, suppressing such dark proclivities will only up their perverse quality, which is what I think the point of showing Maxine busting Buster Keaton's balls is. Not only turning the tables and stopping this random creep from ending her life before she can reach the peak of that Hollywood mountain, but extracting a sadistic vengeance that she can only satiate in the shadows, that can never be shown under those bright and perfect lights of Hollywood.
Do you know what happened to the last person who tried to kill me?
Once Maxine finds there's someone who knows of her wicked deeds, it becomes a game of self-preservation. Everyone killed in Maxine's inner circle, from her gay BFF to her dirty movie co-stars, are sinful in the eyes of kooky Christian America. And if there's a reason for making this movie's shadowy slasher a copycat of the real-world Night Stalker, I'd say it's to draw a parallel between the media inciting fear and panic over both this literal serial killer killing innocents and the abstract idea of the deviancy portrayed in art and entertainment killing innocents, resulting in a hyper-moralistic retaliation. Yet, much like Pearl and Howard, there's a blatant hypocrisy in attempting to censor all the naughty images on the telly, to punish others for showcasing their deviancy while appealing to your own suppressed deviancy in a supposed crusade to suppress all deviancy.
People can protest all their life. They'd look in the mirror, they'd realize we all have demons staring back at us.
Ernest is a cartoonish embodiment of this hypocrisy. He's clearly a closeted gay man.
He wouldn't accept God's love.
And is happy to use violence as long as it benefits his ideology. As a result, the panic takes hold and has Maxine running from her own shadow in order to be seen as pure in the Hollywood spotlight.
Past, it's gonna keep knocking at your door until you open up and let it in.
And this is exactly what Maxine does in the climax of the movie. Opens the door to her shadow and lets it in. She allows her violent, vengeful side to be seen in the spotlight and, in turn, gives the media a moralistic narrative to run with. One where her violence is directed towards a pure cause, killing her father and putting a stop to all his immoral murder cult shenanigans.
I gotta thank God for orchestrating this all.
Which is what I believe the "until you're known as a monster, you're not a star" quote from Bette Davis the movie opens on encapsulates. In a meta sense, like Davis, who trailblazed Hollywood by taking on much darker and unrulier roles than seen or expected from any other actors before her, Maxine wins the movie by embracing the dark side of her character and using it to control her narrative, one where she's awarded with being made into the biggest, boldest star of her era. Yet from a more grounded character perspective, I think Davis's quote in this context alludes to the toll rising to the top of Hollywood's ranks can take on a person's soul. Maxine may have reached her goal of becoming a Hollywood starlet, but she still has to live with her shadow and all the inner guilt and turmoil that comes with it. In her cutthroat pursuit to obtain her dream, all relationships had to literally be severed along the way. She had to push down her empathy and emotion as she saw coworkers literally die trying to reach the heights she reached.
Just dying for some good news like that on my own, you know?
So much blood has been spilled by the countless who have fallen trying to touch this peak.
30 years in this city, I'd never been up here before.
And now Maxine is left with just as much, if not even more survivor's guilt than she had following the events of X. Internally, she knows herself as a monster. So now she's a star. We can see her burden expressed in the difference in energy and belief in herself she had when she was first introduced in X.
You're a f***ing sex symbol.
Versus her similar, yet much more deflated and less self-convinced self-pep talk in the final moments of Maxine.
You're a f***ing movie star.
In the last scene, when we finally see Maxine in that Hollywood heaven of stardom we've waited an entire trilogy to see her reach, it's met with a quiet, almost surreal melancholy rather than triumph and celebration. Maxine doesn't come off as miserable per se, but drained, soul-worn. As absurdly hypocritical as he was, it seems Ernest wasn't entirely wrong to label Hollywood a cult.
Shall finally reveal Hollywood as the cult it is.
Because similarly to a cult or a religion, it sells the promise of a heaven, of an eternal life for all devout believers. To be immortalized on the screen through a film permanently cemented in history is, in a sense, a way of conquering time itself. Being sculpted in and remembered for your youth and beauty forever like a goddess engraved in stone.
Immortalized in cinema history. I mean, how many girls can say that?
Maxine is now in the heart of the fantasy. She's become the selling point she was always chasing. Yet the weight of time pressing down on her is as heavy as it always was. Because just as fast as her co-star Molly was cast and then cast out of the limelight, Maxine is just another cog in the Hollywood dream machine that can and eventually will be replaced by any of the countless other believers just like her. Because what's more quick to expire and be discarded than the latest young and beautiful woman of Hollywood? Maxine's final line says it all.
I just never wanted to end.
Fame, youth, beauty, these things can't and won't last. They can't save you. And the harder you try to hold on to them, the more fleeting they'll feel. Ironically, the final image of Maxine's head is, like Hollywood itself, a plastic construct, and forever embalms her in youth, along with the very thing she believed becoming a world-renowned celebrity would help her escape: death. In other words, it's giving tortured mummification instead of goddess chiseled in stone. The end credits are an ascent through Hollywood, mirroring Maxine's rise, past the heavenly clouds that conceal the empty void, to reveal a myriad of stars illuminating the dark infinity. So what are the defining differences and similarities between the blood that both young Pearl and Maxine spill in their pursuit of attaining and maintaining the allegedly everlasting light of fame? Well, as far as similarities go, both characters choose to kill in the name of doing whatever it takes to reach their dreams.
Whatever's going on in your life that's interfering with this picture, I don't care what it takes. Squash it.
And don't let anything stand in your way.
And both can't help but scratch a devilish itch to indulge a little more violence than is necessary for their cause. In other words, they both have a monster, or a darkness, or a Satan, or whatever you want to call it, within that wants to be fed. And ironically, most of their murders are committed to eliminate the threat of this inner darkness getting exposed to the world and removing their chance at becoming perfection in the eyes of the public. Of course, once Pearl decides to kill Mitzi purely out of spite and jealousy near the end of her movie, she officially branches off from running parallel to Maxine to go full-fledged villain. Yet there's gray even in this branch, because both Pearl and Maxine's movies climax in them embracing and integrating their shadow, accepting their inner killer as who they are. The difference in Maxine's case, though, is that she's in Hollywood and thus can still win the wealth, fame, and perceived perfection she was fighting for, because her movie pokes fun at the absurd notion that in Hollywood, the most powerful and beloved celebrities can basically get away with murder. Pearl doesn't make it to Hollywood. She doesn't earn herself a get-out-of-murder-free card. She has no merciless agent to help her hide her darkest deeds and polish her skeletons for the public gallery.
What are agents for?
Perhaps one of the most essential contrasts between Maxine and Pearl, then, is the difference in the durability of their ambitions. Because, after all, it takes a lot more than just one failed audition to keep Maxine from fighting for the limelight, which is where environment most comes into play. Stewed into both characters' darkness is the murderous instinct to achieve at all costs.
I'm a f***ing star! The whole world is gonna know my name!
Yet Pearl's ambition exists on an island. Whether it was born from nature or nurture, her killer ambition is ultimately unsupported by her mother or anyone else in her life, and is thus rendered easily destructible. Maxine, on the other hand, was instilled with ceaseless ambition by her father, and it fuels her all the way to the top. Both characters experience some level of shame for their secret naughty deeds, but Pearl doesn't get the advantage of being saved and publicly purified by the magical light of Hollywood like Maxine. She's instead left to stew in the darkness of that shame, self-hatred, and broken ambition for decades, making her into a monster. But not the pretty kind of monster that Hollywood likes to celebrate, the ugly kind. The really ugly kind. But maybe I'm being overly generous to Pearl here. If we look closer at the nature of both characters' murders, then Maxine may as well have a halo over her head compared to Pearl's more horny head. Sure, Maxine made tomato juice out of her father's PI, but he wasn't exactly innocent either, given that he worked for and assisted in a cult's killing spree. Even when it comes to Old Woman Pearl and the Buster Keaton Creeper, Maxine's harming some pretty disturbed in the head types who tried to harm her first. Yes, there's some devilishness behind her retribution, but compared to Pearl's tantrum-fueled killings, there is still a sense of justice in there, twisted as it may be. Ruth isn't the warmest mother, but it's hard to argue she got what she deserved. And that goes double for the projectionist and Pearl's defenseless father. Then there's the fact that yes, both Maxine and Pearl embrace their shadow with one last self-indulgent kill in the climax, but Maxine eliminating her father's head also eliminates a serial killer from the streets, ensuring her own victory, sure, but also saving any more of his would-be victims. With Pearl, nothing even close to good results from her brutally hacking up her sweet-as-can-be sister-in-law. Yes, we can go back and forth endlessly over how alike and unalike these two lady killers are, and especially when it comes to Pearl, our level of empathy or lack thereof may vary from rewatch to rewatch. I know it does for me at least, and that's a feature, not a bug of Pearl's movie's effectiveness in my mind. Because exploring why you feel a certain way about certain movie characters who do certain taboo things for both certain and uncertain reasons can certainly be a mind-opening exercise. And it should go without saying that it's a net positive to have multiple dimensions to see a character through, none of which give one definitive explanation for why they are the way they are. Because those are the ingredients for a worthwhile character study, and also much closer to how real-life people are in real life, complex and multidimensional. But not on the internet. On the internet, people are exactly the one-dimensional way you've constructed them to be in your head. Everyone knows that. But perhaps more in line with the X trilogy's overall point is the significance behind what Pearl and Maxine are spilling all this sacrificial blood to attain. And though only one of these bloodthirsty believers achieves their big screen dream in the end, the similarities in the final shots of both their movies hints that they still basically wind up in the same place. Much like Maxine's co-star Molly screaming in hell and terror inside the small confines of this television set as the credits roll over her agonized face, Pearl's fate conveys the same. Her floating head trapped behind the credits as to reflect her imprisonment, her manic acceptance that she'll be trapped in the hell that is her family's farm forever. Likewise, Maxine remarks early in her movie that she'll be the new face of the Puritan franchise, or her head rather.
This is gonna be my head soon, Leon, just you watch.
And she gets exactly what she wants. But as we went into earlier, there's a surreal emptiness as she looks at this lifeless creation of herself from the outside. Like the tagline on the Puritan VHS sleeve reads, "Her faith will be tested, her soul tormented." Maxine's faith in her beauty and star-making quality is tested, and she passes. Yet still, the torment of time and the shadow of guilt press down on her all the same. Molly and Maxine's decapitated heads display their great sacrifice to the deity of fame. Whether it's a literal severance of the head like Molly, or a metaphorical severance of the soul like Maxine, or even a severance from sanity like Pearl, sacrifices are constantly made so the Hollywood dream engine can keep running. So the great facade of fame and beauty can continue to be sold to all the believers through all the screens. And whether we're talking about a believer like Pearl who falls back down to her hell trying to reach this heaven, or a believer like Maxine who strong-arms her way into it, they're still both trapped in a sense, imprisoned with the very demons they tried to escape, inside the very thing they believed would vanquish them. Within what makes a Maxine and a Pearl resides the all-too-human desire for perfection, the desperation to be more than we already are, to find a heaven that can purify us. Because we all contain some amount of darkness. We all have a devil within that we wish we were without. And in a world where time is money and money is a belief system that can be sold to as many people as possible, screen time reigns supreme.
The most precious thing we have in life is our time. We never have enough, especially on a production.
Whether it's carnal desire finding its first baby steps of profitability in the prudish film market of 1918,
Shows like this are going to revolutionize the industry, and I, for one, plan on capitalizing early.
Televangelism desperate to hold relevance in a film market going gangbusters for carnal desire in 1979,
People's eyes are gonna pop
pop out of their damn skulls when they see this. We're gonna be rich.
Or the spreading of Christian moral panic in an attempt to stronghold the film and video market of 1985.
Devil is real,
and he deserves no place on the screens in our home.
The rise of the audio-visual age throughout the 1900s displayed the power the screen has to spread the cultural message, to create the norm. It became a battleground for dominance between industries. The industry of exploiting sex, and its equally naughty cousin violence, and the industry of exploiting Christian morality, both of which sought to define the ideas of heaven and hell for the consumer.
I have come to save all lost children.
The Christian mindset attempts to purify Maxine, while Maxine attempts to purify herself with the get-rich-and-famous mindset. Because in America, and this goes double for 1980s Reagan America, earning yours through blood, sweat, and a heaven that has been marketed to us all comes as second nature in a consumerist society desperate to escape its own shadow, desperate to fill the void of mortality. And as we witnessed with the Baconator praying to God moments before dying, even though he previously claimed to be an atheist.
I'm an atheist myself, but I reckon that kind of guilt, that would just crush me to pieces.
It's human nature to cling to the life raft of a dogmatic belief that promises to save you.
I will not accept a life I do not deserve.
Promises to grant you purpose and immortality as death and hopelessness close in all around. And in the algorithmic dominant here and now, none of this is really relevant anymore at all. So thanks for watching, and be sure to smash that— oh god, it's way more relevant now. Because what is an algorithm if not a hyper-efficient tool for ideological indoctrination? One that promises the most appealing heaven based on the accumulation of all your personal preferences, mediating the perfect products and belief systems straight to you so you can reach that peak of perfection that's being sold to and by everyone everywhere with a screen in their pocket. There's even a sort of dogma in gaming the algorithm, a belief that if you just follow the right steps, say and make the right offerings, you too can reach the highest ranks of fame.
The YouTube algorithm, how to game the system.
And perhaps this is what makes Pearl such an appealing character for audiences today, because she feels like an expression of the inevitably resulting loneliness, shuttered in and stuck with a life she doesn't want, enraptured by the illusions of the screen, illusions of perfection. Her desperation to become the facade, drawing out her worst, most darkest impulses. And pardon me for going another step deeper, but with all these far-out new forms of tech-based visual media taking center stage of cultural attention, perhaps Maxine's movie is also, in a sense, pointing to the fleeting nature of Hollywood itself. Just as Maxine can't escape the cold, hard reality of mortality by becoming a star, neither can the industry of Hollywood itself, as more hyper-efficient AI algorithm-based platforms have already risen to claim its #1 spot in zeitgeist relevance. And as with Maxine, as with all larger-than-life things, Hollywood will one day be completely lost to the sands of time, as forgotten as it was once celebrated, as the centerpiece of culture. Nothing can live forever, no matter how convincingly the fantasy that it will is sold to us.
Turning them into deviants.